Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. I am Umar Mahmood, your host for tonight. Thank you for joining us on this evening, live on YouTube for the second session.
Good evening, ladies and
On the
gentlemen.
Lambeth
Assalamu
IAM
alaikum.
Awareness Conference. Last Saturday, we had our first session hosted by Mustafa that went extremely well. Today, our attention turns to engagement with the public sector. Now we have a brilliant lineup of speakers, and our focus tonight will be to unpack some of the Islamophobia the community has faced, discuss ways of increasing engagement with the Muslim community, and highlighting some of the positivity in our respective fields. We will also look at proposing recommendations to see how we can actually tackle the problems of Islamophobia that the community has faced. Now, the result of this conference will be a write-up of what was discussed with relevant recommendations, and I hope we will have this for some time in the new year, inshallah. From a national perspective, there are approximately 2.6 million Muslims in the UK. Home Office figures revealed earlier this month show the highest number of recorded hate crime offences committed were against Muslims. Of the 6,822 religious hate crimes recorded by the police in the year 1920, over 50% were targeted towards Muslims. From a Lambeth Borough perspective, Muslims make up 7% of the population, and the second largest group of residents by religion according to the 2011 census. The Muslim population roughly breaks up to about 31% Asian, 33% Black African, and 10% other ethnic group. Just before we start with our speakers, I'd like to share with you some facts that have been curated through surveys about the Muslim community in general. So, from an economy perspective, British Muslims contribute over £31 billion a year to the economy. An ICM survey in conjunction with the platform Just Giving concluded Muslims were the top online charity donators. There are approximately 14,000 Muslim-owned businesses which create roughly around 70,000 jobs. Conversely, there has been an increase in bullying and anti-Muslim sentiment against Muslims. 28% of Muslims occupy social housing. Muslims experience highest level of disadvantage in the labor market. Now, it is of great concern to the Muslim community here that Islamophobia has grown further and wider. But I must say the community I know has become extremely resilient, at times just moving on with their lives despite the levels of anti-Muslim prejudice deepening. So where do we go from here? What can we do as a society to tackle this problem? So I'm grateful here to be hosting the second session of the Lambeth Islamophobia Awareness Conference, to have some distinguished speakers here with us today to unpack some of these issues. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Florence Shalomi MP, Member of Parliament for Vauxhall, and one of our newest MPs, taking over from Kate Hoey earlier in the elections. Now, Florence has been working with the Muslim community since she started, and I'm looking forward to hearing from a national perspective what Florence has to say. Florence, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Assalamu alaikum, and apologies, I was having some microphone difficulties there. And really good to join all of you this evening as we come into the end of Islamophobia Awareness Month. And as Umar highlighted, some of those statistics are quite stark. I got elected as the MP for Vauxhall just coming up to a year ago on the 12th of December 2019. And I'm a lifelong resident like many of you. And growing up in Brixton, one of the things that we celebrated was the fact that we were so diverse, with so many different communities mixing, living, and celebrating each other. And that's something that we must never lose sight of. The people who seek to divide us, the people who seek to push those racist views, what they want to see is communities, different communities pitted against each other. And it's really important that we all continue to stand with each other as we normally do in Lambeth. And that's one of the things that I love about representing such a diverse area like Vauxhall. But equally, I'd be lying if I didn't touch on some of the challenges we are facing within the Muslim community here in Vauxhall. We know that for a number of our Muslim communities, there are issues where their children have been excluded from schools. We know that with some of our Muslim communities, there are issues right from the beginning with childbirth, with the way our women are treated in hospitals. We know that with a number of our Muslim communities, there are issues when they then leave school and then trying to get a job in the labour market, the discrimination they face there. A survey a few years ago highlighted that if you have a Muslim sounding or African sounding name on your CV, you're more likely to be rejected when you apply for jobs. We know that there are issues in terms of mental health and the fact that there's a high proportion of Muslim people and Black people in the mental health system. We know that there's issues with overcrowding. I see this so much in my casework that I receive as the MP. Overcrowding is one of the biggest issues that I receive in my inbox, overcrowding and issues with the Home Office. We know that, again, if you're from the Muslim community, there is still a lot of prejudice from the Home Office with you trying to get those important documents. You've lived here for many years, you're trying to then become a British citizen, but yes, there are stumbles and many blocks. What we saw over the last few years with the Windrush generation and that hostile environment, if we're really honest, we know that that's been going on for many years to the Muslim community. And it's about how we continue to work together and call out some of those key issues. One of the things that I've very much been looking at as the Member of Parliament is some of the legislation we will be setting in Parliament. And I'm quite worried about some of the language and the rhetoric coming out from the current government. And it's really important that we call out some of those issues, especially where, again, they will highlight and play into the hands of the people who seek to divide us. Since 2016, on the back of the Brexit referendum, I think we have seen an increase in hate crime. On the one hand, the police will say that this is because more people are reporting it. But again, you know, within your community, there are so many people who suffer, who still don't come forward to report this because they may not have confidence in the police, because they may have reported it before and it hasn't been resolved. So it's really important that we look at how we address some of those issues and why it is that there's still a massive issue and increase in hate crime. One of the things that I'm keen to look at is some of the legislation coming forward. We saw it a few years ago with the legislation around Prevent, but there are still so many legislations coming from the government, which I think is very hostile towards Muslim people. Whether it's legislation around detention, whether it's legislation around serious youth violence, whether it's legislation around migration and freedom of movement, we have to call all of that out. I'm proud that we are one of the highest remaining voting boroughs in the UK when it came to Brexit, but we are leaving the EU, and we need to look at what that will mean for a number of people who have family and friends across the European Union. We need to make sure that engagement continues. Just because we are leaving the EU, it doesn't mean that we should cut off our ties with the rest of the EU. And that's one of the key things that myself and other MPs will be voting for before the end of this year. If we turn to the pandemic that unfortunately has caused so many lives, including here locally in Vauxhall over the last year, in the form of COVID-19, coronavirus, again, we've seen that's had a big impact on the Muslim community. We've seen so many people die. We've seen so many people not being able to bury their loved ones. We've seen so many key celebrations and events that you were not able to join in. And that's been a big issue. That's had a big impact on people's mental health, big impact on how people socialize, and big question marks about what will happen next year. But equally, we saw the community pulling together, offering aid, offering shelter, offering support packages for a number of elderly and vulnerable residents within the Muslim community. But again, you know that within your community, this happens anyway. So you are demonstrating what you normally do. where we saw people coming together and helping each other. So I salute everybody and I commend everybody who was working hard during the lockdown to provide aid and to provide support for a number of our residents who were really vulnerable. As we're coming out of the lockdown, it's important for us to look at some of the issues around vaccination. I think there's a lot of misinformation around the vaccination. And again, we know within the Asian and the Muslim community and the Black community, a lot of people are skeptical about vaccines. But it's really important that we read the right information. I'm sure we're all on different WhatsApp groups and we've been sent a number of information. I know I've been sent information from my own family members. And it's about us calling that out because we need to make sure that when a proper vaccine is certified, that people do come forward and then get that vaccination. This virus is still with us, unfortunately, and it's going to be how we continue to look at how we live with the virus. And just lastly, just to thank everybody across the community. He's been working with the council, he's been working with myself as the MP, and he's been working in the community. Your hard work and efforts is not going untold. It's about how we continue to celebrate your work, how we continue to look at how to build those bridges, how we continue to celebrate everything that's great within our community, be honest about some of those challenges, and look at how we as a community here in Lambeth can work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence, for your time there. You've touched on a number of areas: mental health, prejudice from the Home Office, overcrowding, hostile legislation. It's all something that is really down to policy. And I just wonder, in your mind, just from an MP's perspective, what do you think that the community can do to really engage in these policy areas? Because for some reason, and actually to a large extent, we do feel either excluded or we do feel that our voice is not heard. So how do we get to that stage where we can then actually be active members in policy-making areas?
One of the key things we need to look at is the stages of when policy is then decided. Because of the current pandemic, Parliament isn't working properly in my view. And we saw in the beginning of the pandemic in March, there was emergency legislation put forward around COVID-19 to effectively stop people from going out and the whole issue around social distancing. But there were a number of things in that first initial legislation that I think did have a big impact within our community. So I touched on the issue of overcrowding, where people have been asked to stay at home. Again, if you're a family of 4 or 5 living in a 2-bedroom or 1-bedroom apartment, that's really hard. If you're a family of 6 living on a 3rd floor with no access to garden, that's really hard for you to ask those families to stay at home. If you're an elderly resident living on the 3rd floor and you rely on your children coming to visit you, and then you've been told that they can't come and visit you, that's going to have a big impact within the community. So I think the key thing that we can do is look at how we scrutinise some of that legislation. I've got a role to play in that as well, in terms of flagging up those key policies as and when. What we're trying to do in Parliament is make sure that the government actually discusses that with us as parliamentarians. At the moment, sometimes, I'll be honest with you guys, even myself as the local MP and other MPs, we find out through the media. So it's about us calling out the government and trying to hold them to account. I think going forward, there are a number of key legislations that I know that are coming through next year, and I'm keen to start that engagement with people locally. There's a legislation on online harms. And again, we need to look at all that issue around, the big issue around where the government will try and clamp down on key things, and the big issue around terrorism and misinformation. There's a big piece of legislation called the Serious Violence Bill. I'm keen, again, for us to look at not having more legislation to effectively stop and search and stop people and criminalize people, but actually how do we target some of the perpetrators? So I want to see in that legislation, for example, a key thing around child criminal exploitation, which again, I know is a big issue within our community. And lastly, going forward, we need to look at legislation to help improve some of the key issues I've talked about, working in partnership with Lambeth Council to how do we build some of those houses that people need? How do we create some of those jobs? we have to be very clear that when we are coming out of this pandemic, the people who've been working hard supporting their communities aren't the ones who are going to see their benefits cut. So again, we need to look at the issue around taxation. The Chancellor's just given an update on the spending review, and they've cut aid spending across the country, which again helps a number of countries with high Muslim populations. They've spent more money on defence. Again, I don't think that going towards the right solution. Actually, we should look at, making sure that the UK isn't involved in any foreign wars. But equally, we do have to have a strong defence system. But we need to make sure, we don't have to drag the government kicking and screaming to fund free school meals, which again, I know something that a number of people benefited from in Lambeth. So I think the key thing in terms of policy and legislation is making sure we have early sight. We look at how we can respond to consultations in a meaningful way. And you look at how you hold me as the local MP and the 2 other MPs for Lambeth to account and raising concerns, whether it's signing petitions, whether it's writing to us to then write to the relevant ministers, making sure that the voice of the community is heard.
Thank you, Florence. I really appreciate that. And of course, all the time that you've taken out to engage with the Muslim community, your staff as well, obviously, with a diverse background is fantastic for us to really engage with. And we do have some questions that have come up from the local community, which we'll share during the Q&A session. But thank you for addressing us at this time. I'd like to now bring in a local councillor. Speaking of partnerships with the local council, Florence, we do have local councillor Irfan Mohammed, who joins us today. He's the champion for local business and also the lead on Islamophobia. So I'd like to invite Councillor Irfan Mohammed to share his thoughts with us on this topic. Councillor Irfan, thank you.
Thank you, Umar, for inviting me to speak here today and the rest of the team. My colleague, my friend, my sister Florence has covered a lot already. I work very closely with her and I have great emphasis in her. We work very closely. I'm a Vauxhall councillor and she's an MP, so we work very closely in tackling issues that we face. As Umar has mentioned, my name's Irfan Mohammed and I'm one of the local councillors Lambeth and also the lead on Islamophobia. It's a great pleasure in being on a panel with such a great lineup, and it's wonderful that this is the first time in Lambeth we have had an Islamophobia awareness conference. What makes it much more special is that this event is led by the fantastic community, which gives it the identity and strength, and also shows how passionate the community is to tackle Islamophobia within our borough and the wider society. As a councillor in Lambeth, I work very closely with the faith leaders and mosques, churches, synagogues, and temples. This is to help build unity and strength within the community to show that we are more united in tackling hatred and prejudice towards others. But unfortunately, with statistics showing hate crime is on the rise, we're not denying it and we know it. And it's more important now more than ever to work together and show that we won't let this hatred and prejudice divide us. With such rich diversity in the borough and with people from all walks of life who work, live and travel together, it shows that Lambeth as a borough does not accept any form of hate crime, and we are supporting Islamophobia Awareness Month to show that there is no tolerance for hatred in society. Last year, we saw a real increase in engagement with the Muslim community. Sadly, we've had this pandemic of COVID-19, which meant this year we've had to revisit some of the strategies we wanted to implement. But that does not mean we have just sat back and done nothing as a council. Some of the things we have done as a council is we've held numbers of meetings with Muslim leaders and also always dialogue with key people in the community. Humaira, who is on the panel and also is the head teacher of Iqra Primary School, one of the 2 primary schools within Lambeth, has also been part of these meetings to discuss schooling matters. We have organized 2 Eid receptions, which were held at the town hall, organized interfaith community iftar, organized at the town hall, We also adopted a definition of Islamophobia, which I had raised at full council and had two great leaders of the community in Umar Mahmoud and Humaira Salim to deputize towards. During this month of Islamophobia Awareness Month, I did a video with my colleague Sonia Winifred, who is the Cabinet Member for Equalities and Culture. This was a video to raise awareness of Islamophobia and also to make sure to people to know that as a Lambeth Council and within Lambeth, we not tolerate any sort of hate crime within the borough. And these can be found on the Lambeth Council Twitter account, Facebook account, and my Twitter and Facebook pages to raise awareness that as a council, there is no form of hatred that we would accept. Through the council's Sacre Committee, we have sent out literature to schools to raise awareness of Islamophobia within their school assemblies. So children, when school assemblies are held, children can hear what Islamophobia is, how it's dealt with, and in Lambeth, we do not tolerate it. On the council website, we have put literature on what Islamophobia Awareness Month is and what we are doing to tackle it. But what the main aim of this is not only to raise issues of Islamophobia or raise it within the month of Islamophobia Awareness Month. We don't want it to be like, oh, do you know what? We've done it in Islamophobia Awareness Month. That's it. Let's go to next year. No, we want also to take, we want to be working on it all year through and how we can work closely as a council with the community, with faith leaders, with our churches, mosques, synagogues, and Hindu temples to show that we do not tolerate any form of hatred. And also, we want to unite communities by breaking down barriers and building bridges. As a community in Lambeth, working together, we can tackle all forms of hate crime, celebrate the diversity, and show Lambeth is a welcoming borough for all. I don't want this to end here, but as this is the only the beginning. And as a community working together, my aim is to build on the success we have gained, but there's much more that needs to be done. But would also urge you as the community, as community leaders, as to see, if you ever see or face any form of hate crime, please do report it, as without reporting it, it cannot be seen and no action can be taken. And I'd like to make you aware that there are many ways that this can be reported. As a council, we have many different forms of reporting, which can be found on our website. Or if you're in direct danger, the police, call them 999. If it's not in direct danger, and report it to the police on their 101 number. There's many ways of reporting it. Once you report it on the 101 number, call, report it on the council website so we can have a record of where it's happening, when it's happening, and how we can work together to tackle this issue. So I urge you, please do not be a victim of hate crime or prejudice, as by reporting it, we could tackle this together. Once again, I would like to thank Umar and the team for organizing these two conferences. I am here to listen to your concerns and see what we as a council can do for the Muslim community in Lambeth, whether it is for youth clubs, businesses, charities, mosques, schools, residents, employees, and employers. So please do get in touch. I look forward to working alongside you to continue this important work. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Irfan. Really appreciate you joining us, and you've touched on a number of activities that took place last year. And yes, sadly, this year we've had the pandemic, so we've been unable to do a number of activities. But we do hope that in the next few months, once this pandemic is over, hopefully we'll be in a position to host an event. Although I'm not sure with the numbers whether we'll be able to have everyone there. There is a couple of questions that have come in from a local authority perspective, from a council perspective, on live on YouTube. So we'll come to those during the Q&A session. I'd like to now introduce our next speaker, who is Humaira Salim. She is the head teacher for Ikra VA Primary School, which is in Lambeth, and actually joined me in the deputation as Councillor Irfan referred to at the full council meeting, where we proposed the adoption of the definition on Islamophobia. I'd like to invite Humaira to share her story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Omar. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. A very good evening and peace be upon you all. I'm very delighted to join you this evening, and thank you so much for taking your valuable time and listen to us, because we are raising a very important issue with you. I'm here because I am a Muslim, and I'm here because I'm a head teacher as well, and I run a Muslim school. So I've got a lot of experience. And Islamophobia is an issue which I think needs to be raised in a way that can make a positive impact on our children, because it's our children that I worry about the most. Yes, of course, it's something we experience as adults, but I will be saying things more from a children's perspective, or rather, what can we do for our children so that their future can be safe and a positive one and a bright one, inshallah. So I've got some slides that I've asked Omar to show, which is sadly not a very sort of positive start, but it just puts things in perspective for us. So these are children who, on the invitation of actually Florence Ashalomi, went to the Mayor's Q&A, which was one of the most exciting experiences that our kids had at the time. So seemingly very positive experience, which Florence put on her Twitter account. And I probably would have never known about it, but it's just that I was updating my website and came across this, and it was truly shocking. And I would really like you to have a read of that, because I would never hope that our children would ever read this, the ones who are targeted in these very, very unpleasant comments. And I won't even read them. Well, every time when I read them, I feel very sad. Thank you so much, Omar. I do know this is a minority and a loud group on social media that can probably make comments which may not be reflecting the wider society. I do hope that it's a positive wish on my side, but it's truly very unpleasant. So you saw these slides. I don't have to convince you that prejudice against Muslims is really present in the British society. I know that Islamophobia, unfortunately, is widespread in Britain. The children in my school and my family have experienced it. The women in my school and in my family have experienced it. I, as a Muslim woman, have experienced it. It's very real and it's painful. And it has a lasting negative impact on those who have endured it. When we held in our school the very first session to discuss with parents this very issue of Islamophobia, many of the mothers came forward actually, and they shared with us that really horrific lived experiences, such as their hijab being snatched, pulled from their heads, being called names in front of their children to the extent that their children were made to cry. These are truly very unpleasant and horrific experiences, yet almost all of those mothers felt that they had to just accept those experiences and had to carry on. sadly, I think they have internalized their encounters. The majority of them didn't even know that they could report it. Many feared that they could not prove it and that no one would believe them. But I'm not here today to lament about it. Instead, I'm here to bring a positive discourse. I hope to invite and encourage those who are listening today that they revisit how their views and perceptions about Islam are shaping the way they interact with Muslims. What can you do to see beyond the negative narrative about Muslims that is constantly perpetuated by the media, unfortunately by some politicians, and those so-called social commentators, and a few names come into my mind here in the UK, abroad, in Europe, and indeed across the Western world. In this context, I would like to say two important things, and I think these two things, if we can address them, will really start that positive discourse for our children. And of course, I will be seeing things from a school's perspective. I think number one, there's a need to recognize the contribution of Islamic civilization in the West. So our interaction, the British interaction with Muslims didn't start from 9/11. It didn't start from 2005. It started ages ago. It started decades ago. It started centuries ago. And it was a very positive one. So that contribution that the Islamic civilization made in the West, that needs to be put out there to the wider community so that they know about it. And we need to take steps to include a positive narrative about Islam and Muslims in schools particularly, to bring out a positive curriculum. I think our society must acknowledge, recognize, and celebrate the contributions of Islam and Islamic civilizations in the past and indeed today. It's about time that we in the West recognize that Western civilization as we know it today wouldn't exist without Islamic cultures. And I can give you many, many examples, but I will just give you two. Arabic numerals from Al-Khwarizmi, which revolutionized our capacity to engage in science and trade. Hay bin Yaqzan, whose work published in Oxford in 1671 became a catalyst for the contributions of seminal European philosophers, including John Locke and Robert Boyle. So they made an equal contribution to what the West is today. The start of enlightenment didn't start with Rome or with Greeks. So we need to see how these civilizations made an impact on England, but in the West widely, but also how Muslims contributed to that as well. And I think the list is very long. I think even today, when you look at the art, to the architecture, to the science, that impact is everywhere. So we need to find a way to bring these contributions out in a way that can be taught to the children through a positive curriculum. In addition to that, I would say that we need to speak to the wider community. We need to educate them that the impact of Muslims and the Muslim culture is very close to us as well. I think that Tommy Robinson will find it very difficult. And it's something that my assistant had told me about Trafalgar Square. So I was thinking about Tommy Robinson, that I think he'd find it very difficult to spew hate against Muslims in Trafalgar Square if he knew that Trafalgar Square is named after the historical Battle of Trafalgar in Spain, where the word Trafalgar comes from Arabic word Taraf al-Ghar, which means the side of, I think, side of cave. So the very word actually comes from Muslim heritage. It's about time that the contribution of Islam and Muslim is given its due place in the curriculum. And I think it needs to go beyond the narrative of terrorism. It needs to go beyond just the point that Muslims are here. And when you talk about them, actually, it's the contributions that Muslims have made. In that context, we need to be highlighting Islam, because when we highlight Islam, our children relate to that in a very, very positive way. And I think through that, our Muslim children will be very included within our curriculums as well. I think the second thing which we need to do is for a society to tackle ignorance about Islam and about Muslims. And I think it's a salient point, but I think it's very important. And that links back to how the wider society sees Islam and the Muslims eventually. There's a difference between religious acts and acts done in the name of religion. When it comes to a Christian attack, the Christian community does not find itself in a position where the whole community has to apologize for the actions done by one extremist. And neither should they have to. There is enough of understanding of Christianity to know that that has nothing to do with the teaching of Bible. However, when a similar thing happens for Muslims, the whole Muslim community is thrown into the spotlight, and leaders are expected to condemn the issue. Most leaders are expected to address this problem within the community. And I think that is problematic because the wider community doesn't understand Islam. They don't understand the teachings of Islam. So we need to bring the society into a position where they can see actually the acts that are done by individuals are not the representation of Islam. And I think that needs to be done through a religious literacy, through a greater understanding of our religion, which is Islam. We need to ensure that our society is educated beyond to know that there's a difference between religious acts and acts done in the name of religion. A society that is educated enough to be able to burden the shock of act that is intended to divide it. I know Brother Omar mentioned just earlier on about the contributions that our Muslim community makes here in England. We don't often hear about the headline that British Muslims donate 100 million pounds in charity in a single month of Ramadan. That is an incredible amount of money to give out. We don't hear about the Muslim community as being the most charitable, as being the very hospitable ones. And I think that will only happen if our media takes a positive view of our community. It will happen if in our schools we teach more about a positive image of Islam as well. And I think at the very least for the children, of course, we have difficult names. I get that. And they're Arabic names with lots of syllables and with lots of vowels as well. But make an effort when the children are in school, make an effort to say their names correctly to begin with. And that is a great way to include them. Don't try to anglicize them. I think maybe for the people who are not able to pronounce their names correctly, it's not a big deal, but for the child whose name is not said correctly, it's a big deal. And oftentimes the very name starts the very process where our children feel that they are not part of the society. So make an effort to say their names, pronounce their names correctly. So these are two key things that I wanted to discuss in the context of supporting our children in the school, is directly teaching about Islam within the school, and then educating the wider community, the wider society about the link that Islam has with our society. It's not a deficit position that we have to be in. We need to bring a positive view of Islam for our friends who are not Muslims and who don't know about it. There's a real danger to where we're heading at the moment. Negative images of Muslim promoted by the media and by the political leaders often serve to build or provide evidence of existing Islamophobic prejudices. And if you look at the youth, look at the prison population at the moment, it doesn't help. Unfortunately, about 27% of Muslims are in the prison population. And that is a huge percentage. It tells us that somehow our community, our youth, are not being valued. They don't feel, or at least they feel they're not valued. They feel they don't have any stake in this society. The ways in which Muslims have been marginalized as a religious group is alarming, and we need to do something about it. We need to protect our youth. We need to protect our future generation. We need to give them a sense of success and reasons to be fully included in a society where they're valued, where they can make positive contributions. Thank you.
Jazakallah, thank you so much, Sister Humaira. It actually takes me back to a point that I made during the Remembrance Day, which is specifically that the Muslim contribution in the peace efforts is rarely ever discussed in the historic context, and part of creating this new culture of recognition of different communities is part of a wider systemic issue that our history reflects only a limited portion of history. And so I made this suggestion as well that it needs to reflect what actually happened and the contributions of those communities. Otherwise, forever we will be hearing what was the Muslim contribution, and Muslims have no right to wear poppies, or they did not contribute to so many special things that actually took place throughout our history. So definitely that is something, and a few questions have also been raised as well based on your contribution, which we will continue to look at in the Q&A. I'd like to now invite our next speaker, BCU Commander Colin Wingrove. Colin has recently joined Lambeth as a borough commander, and prior to this actually had a number of roles. He's been in policing for 25 years. He is committed to working closely with local communities in trying to improve trust and confidence in policing. He has served different parts of London, including Hillingdon, Ealing, Kensington and Chelsea, and also across the border to Wandsworth. He's been responsible for roads and transport policing command as well, and has been looking to working with safe and able teams to tackle hate crime, including Islamophobia. So I'd like to invite Borough Commander Colin Wingrove to share his thoughts on policing matters relating to Islamophobia. Colin Wingrove.
Good evening, everyone, and Uma, thank you so much for the invitation to join you tonight, and really have this opportunity to build links, talk about the role of the local police, but also to thank you as well for your role as with our Lambeth Independent Advisory Group and the work that you do with the Met Police as well to help in terms of building bridges, community engagement and building understanding, which is incredibly invaluable and very relevant to what we're talking about tonight. So thank you, Uma. I think having this discussion and having this ability to raise awareness around Islamophobia and to build trust and confidence and awareness of what the police does locally, as I say, is really important. And some of the work that you sort of mentioned there, just with roads and transport policing with the safer transport teams, it's about how our local officers are engaging, working around London, and working in Lambeth to be a visible presence, be a reassuring, be a source of information and support, and take action where crimes are reported to us, so that we can support victims and families and bring perpetrators of hate crime and Islamophobia to justice. I think that's incredibly important. We do a huge amount of community engagement. I think that's really where it starts, trying to build trust and confidence. So we have our safer neighbourhood teams and our officers in every ward and that presence there. We have our what we call a partnership and prevention hub with officers who specifically deal with hate crime and faith crimes, making links with different organisations and certainly making links with mosques and the Muslim community in Lambeth to ensure that we can provide information, be a source of support, help and advice, and of course, and gather information about what is happening locally. We have officers in our schools, so in our secondary schools, and we've started to put officers in contact with primary schools as well. Again, really important to build links, have a presence of policing in Lambeth, make sure that local people know who their local officers are, and that starts from school. As I mentioned, we also have our youth engagement officers, again working with youth organisations alongside the schools officers, and also supporting schemes, for example, like police cadets. So again, that emphasis really on making sure that we're engaging broadly across the borough, and especially making sure that we're also have those local contacts with our mosques and groups and our Muslim community, so that we can be that approachable, accessible service to give people that reassurance and confidence that if hate crime and Islamophobia is reported to us, that we take it seriously, we investigate it, we provide that support, and we bring any offenders to justice. I think the other area really, so just mentioned by previous speakers, just around the reporting, and there are many new ways over the last few years around how people can report crimes to us. And if anyone goes online and Googles the Met Police and looks at the Met Police website, for example, www.met.police.uk, on the very front page you can type in your postcode and find out about your local police teams. You can also find out information about how to report crime, and it takes you through those steps. So you can report online offences. Of course, we'll always say in an emergency, call 999, and you can always call 101. But there are many new ways that you can now report crime, because we need to know what's happening, and we need people to feel confident to come forward, so they can access the service that we deliver on your behalf in your local communities, which I think is incredibly important, that you have that confidence that you can do that. And when you do report crimes to us, we have officers who are increasingly aware of issues, of different communities, of different cultures, and aware of the impact. And I said at the beginning, Uma, it's one of in terms of community engagement, it's part of doing that engagement, so we can find out about the sentiment within communities, what matters to local communities, how local communities feel about what happens, and so that officer can able to provide that service and provide that reassurance going forward. And at the moment, where we have seen increases in hate crime reporting, we are also solving more hate crime as well. So we, on average, 1 in 5 crimes are detected, which is above average for other crime types. And that's partly around the investment and the focus that we put into relation to hate crime and Islamophobia crime reporting. So I hope that gives some confidence that we do take it seriously, and we will follow those steps in order to investigate it and to bring someone to justice. I think the other area, and obviously it's been a hugely challenging time, and again it's touched on before about how COVID has perhaps disrupted some of the normal ways in which services engage with local communities. So obviously online is a really important way to do that. And we just need to keep thinking about how we can utilise, whether it's Zoom and whether it's other forms of, whether it's Microsoft Teams and other online platforms are available, to be able to be more of an accessible service. Our ward panels, for example, use virtual ward panels, online surveys, for example. Again, it's about trying to collect that community information so that we can continually tailor our service to provide trust and confidence, and to encourage more people to come forward. And I think longer term, I think 2 other areas I suppose I really want to just sort of touch on. One is just around the organisation itself. So we want to make sure that we have a service that also is representative of London, and that's through recruitment. So we have more Black, Asian, minority ethnic officers, more Muslim officers joining the Met Police. And that has enormous benefits for policing and for local communities, not in terms of an organisation that becomes more culturally aware and more tailored in its approach to community policing, but also in building trust within communities and coming forward. And we work closely, for example, with the Association of Muslim Police Officers, who again help in increasing awareness internally in the organisation to help officers understand the impact of things like Islamophobia, so that there is that awareness when people do call us. Our officers will be aware, and will be able to provide that support, and also be able to talk to colleagues as well to whether it's advice and guidance in terms of how to handle certain crimes, and work closely with local communities. And I think the other bit around that. And one of the outcomes of a lot of the engagement work that we want to do is that recruitment. And again, Google careers at Met Police, and it'll take you to the careers website. And we are a recruiting organisation. Next year is the degree apprenticeship, a 3-year scheme designed to bring in new recruits and learn and work at the same time. And at the end of those 3 years, obtain a degree and have hopefully a fulfilling career as a police officer. And we want more people to come forward and to work with us to help serve local communities by becoming police officers in London, from all ranges of backgrounds, but certainly from the Muslim community. Having more officers working within our teams, within our organisation, within our neighbourhoods is another step that we can all take to increasing awareness and tackling hate crime and Islamophobia, but also working towards a more cohesive, harmonious society, which we all want and everyone deserves to have. So I'll finish there. And again, I thank you for the opportunity, and as always, look forward not only now, but hopefully in the future when we can be out and about more, and be able to sort of revisit mosques and so on in the future when the lockdown begins to end.
Thank you, Colin, so much for that. And actually, it's great that you're able to join us, because this is actually the first kind of engagement since you joined us as the Borough Commander with the Muslim community in a wider context, which is, really good for us as a community to hear your thoughts and to, maybe at some point link in with some of those policies and some of those things that you mentioned around increasing in recruitment and really understanding those cultural differences and those important faith elements like Ramadan. We do have regular visits, of course, between officers and the Muslim community, but really more looking at towards how we can tackle Islamophobia, maybe at a policy level and a more strategic perspective. But thank you very much, Colin. I'd like to now move on to our next speaker, who is Huda Osman, who is Islamophobia Response Unit caseworker. And Huda has, I'll let Huda speak really, because I think this is something that's really important for us to hear from the perspective of those people who have actually been involved in these incidents. Huda, over to you.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and good evening. Thank you, Umar, for that introduction. So like Umar said, my name is Huda Osman, and why I'm speaking to you today is because I work for the Islamophobia Response Unit, which is a department at MEND who provides support to victims of Islamophobia. So of course, here today we're speaking about everything to do with Islamophobia, about in terms of how the police respond to it. And so that's why I'm here today to discuss what support there is out there for victims of Islamophobia. So what had happened was MEND was established, Muslim Engagement Development was established in 2015. And the aim of MEND is really to recognize and deal with Islamophobia in different spheres. So for example, we have a department, the policy team, and they respond to anything in terms of, policies and strategies to review them and see whether any of them are inherently disadvantaging the Muslim community. And it's really getting the Muslim voice heard when it comes to politics. And there's also the community team who will run local events, start to engage with Muslims on the ground and get Muslims educated on things like media, what's going on in the media. And we know that, of course, the media has a huge role to play with the rise of Islamophobia in the UK. So it's really important to get the Muslim community educated on these aspects. And likewise, it's getting the Muslims involved in political discourse. So those two main departments of MEND are quite proactive approaches to Islamophobia. However, in 2000, what began happening is that when MEND was established, they started to receive numerous reports saying that Muslims saying that, look, I was a victim of Islamophobia and I don't know what to do. I was a victim of Islamophobia, I don't know how to take it's the victim of Islamophobia in the aspect that it was the employees, so they're too scared to do anything, or they don't have the financial means to actually make a change. And so what MEND realizes that we need a unit to really provide legal assistance to victims of Islamophobia, because this is a huge gap that no one was actually filling. And so in 2017, alhamdulillah, MEND established the Islamophobia Response Unit, which I am now working at. And so the IRU has a few main functions, and the first is to provide free legal assistance to victims of Islamophobia. And this encompasses loads of different aspects, be it just a phone call, on the call assistance, then we provide that. Or we can also provide police liaising services. Of course, loads of victims of Islamophobic hate crime actually tell me, I'm too scared to speak to the police. And this is for numerous reasons. It may be due to their previous interaction with the police, or the fact that, of course, we know that there is a, which Colin touched upon previously, and that the police are trying to address is the fact there is a lack of representation, and so there is significant biasness within the police, and so people are too scared to approach the police, and that's why we offer police liaison services. Likewise, if any member of any victim of Islamophobia reports that their employee, they're too scared to approach them, we can then act on their behalf. So we do provide free legal assistance to victims of Islamophobia. And we also recognize being a victim means that there's of course some significant trauma that has been made. And so I remember looking at the statistics, and about 70% of victims of Islamophobia have said that they've been emotionally impacted as a result of their incident. And so we do provide basic emotional support to victims of Islamophobia. This is quite basic. So if, for example, I do see that, okay, this client doesn't require much more emotional attention, then we will able to refer them to whatever services we have engagement with to provide them with the additional emotional services. And likewise, being a victim, being such a quite now, alhamdulillah, it's growing in terms of the amount of people that have approached us. We've started to realize that, look, not every case is Islamophobic, and so someone may need attention from another organization, and that's why we also offer referral services, and we have numerous engagement with loads of different organizations. And so if, for example, you report to us and we don't think that this falls within the remit of Islamophobia, we won't just leave you there and without any assistance. We will definitely direct you to those who we feel is best to assist you. And likewise, we don't always just support victims. We also do provide Islamophobic training, which means that, for example, we go into messages where people just don't understand what to do. And so we do have a proactive stance where we provide assistance on how to actually report an incident if they were ever to be a victim of Islamophobia, giving them tips and advice on what they should do. And it's really just building that community on the ground. We're just trying to build the community to understand that, look, this isn't something that you should just ignore. This is something that you can report. And I believe one of the previous speakers did pick up on the fact that there were a lot of mothers in schools that felt that they were victims of Islamophobia, didn't know that they could actually report this and that people can actually be charged and tried for their behavior. And so, of course, the IRU are there to also provide Islamophobic training. And so in terms of the type of cases we receive, so the IRU is split into two main departments. So the first is hate crime, and hate crime is everything to do with police, be it physical assault, verbal abuse, criminal damage. So anything that comes under the criminal aspect comes under the hate crime bracket. And there's also the discrimination department within the IRU, which deal with things with like employment being called, for example, feeling discrimination, the fact that you weren't given a promotion, or your employee has said an Islamophobic term, which sounds bizarre, but it does actually happen in this day and age, unfortunately. It may be that you were discriminated and you weren't allowed to, for example, board a bus because of your hijab. And this is, like I said, has happened, and it is a reoccurring issue, unfortunately. The fact that some schools don't actually provide prayer room facilities, this comes all under the Islam discrimination department. And so these are the type of cases that we receive. And from these, since the opening, the IRU have currently received 750 reports. Of those, 400 of them are to do with hate crime. So of course, the majority of our reports are hate crime based, unfortunately, which unfortunately it's still quite leading, but what we have seen is that there is a rise of discrimination cases coming our way. And we feel that even the type of Islamophobia that are being reported to us is quite covert, and it's not as obvious and easily to pick out Islamophobia the way it was done so historically. And so right now the IRU is comprised of 3 full-time staff members, including myself, Huda, and I'm a caseworker. And we also have Faisal Mukith, who is the head of legal, and she by background is an employment lawyer. And we have Umay Yahya, who is the admin and caseworker. As well as us full-time staff members, we also do have volunteers, and our volunteers comprise of 18 legal supervisors. Howard, who will be speaking next, is actually one of alhamdulillah, one of our legal supervisors, and they are pro bono. These are lawyers, mostly all of them lawyers and actually barristers, who all have their full-time job but understand how severe the situation is now, unfortunately, with Muslims. And so in their free time, they're volunteering for the IRU to provide legal assistance. And likewise, we have 23 extra caseworkers who are completely volunteer, and likewise, like the legal supervisors, understand the need to actually support victims of Islamophobia. And so we've trained them up so that they have all this necessary knowledge and the skills to respond to victims of Islamophobia. And so when we're looking at Islamophobia, unfortunately, it's not a matter that has been decreasing. I know there's been a slight decrease in the recent statistics published by the Home Office, but it still is obvious that Muslims are at the forefront of receiving abuse. And the fact that right now Muslims account to 50% of religiously aggravated attacks, which is quite significant. And that's why it's so imperative that we have these conversations to ensure that Muslims are being supported and all the necessary support is there present to actually support victims of Islamophobia. And likewise, when I looked at the same time period for Lewisham specifically, there was 28 cases reported to the police. And now it may seem like that is quite a low number, but it could mean one or two things. It could mean that, in fact, Lewisham don't have that many Islamophobes, which I guess I won't be picking that option, but it could actually just mean that, look, there are incidents of Islamophobia happening and they aren't being reported. And like Colin said, it's so important that we do report these incidences, because that's the only way that we can actually respond. And so in terms of to give you sort of brief of what sort of cases we received, quite recently actually I've been speaking to one client who's been suffering at the hands of her neighbour for 10 years. So her neighbour has been directly harassing her for 10 years, and what this means is the amount of incidents there've been is so severe. So for example, noise nuisance, she's not been able to sleep. Her daughter is actually quite young, she's under the age of 10. And this means that they've had lack of sleep. She's had her front door urinated on. She's had her car damaged on numerous occasions. And she said to me, you know what, Huda, I don't even want to fix my car sometimes because I don't think there's a point, because I know in a few days' time they'll come and they'll damage it once again. And so she's been reporting to this council. She's been reporting the issue to the council. She's had no support whatsoever. And of course, that resulted to the abuse continuing for 10 years. And now her mental well-being is completely deteriorated. She's contemplated suicide, having a minor in her, having a minor as well, taking care of them. That's also impacted the young child. And so, of course, this is quite concerning. And so we've now stepped in and tried to assist her. And so, likewise, what I'd say to anyone who's going through any incidents of Islamophobia is, if you feel you can't approach the council, or you can't approach the police, or you have approached them but you feel that you've had no success in that, is definitely report to the Islamophobia Response Unit. Our contact details I will put up on the link, but I'll mention it here now anyways. And so if you'd like to contact us, we have 3 main modes. The first is our hotline, which is 020 3904 6555. Or otherwise, you can contact us via email, which is at iru@men.org.uk, or you can report it online at the MEN website. So I'll leave it there, inshallah.
Jazakallah Huda, thank you so much for that. And it's really sad to hear what kind of problems people are having. I couldn't imagine living next to a neighbor, that had done all of those things to me. But like you mentioned, there's people like yourself who are out there who are doing fantastic work as caseworkers to really tackle these problems. So we really appreciate that. As we're running short of time, I'm going to be quick to quickly introduce our next speaker, who is Hawa Sheikh, who is a barrister who works as a district Crown Prosecutor for the Crown Prosecution Service. She is also the chair of the CPS Muslim Network. I'm going to make Hawa the co-host for a very short period of time, so that she can actually share a brief presentation that she has to speak to you today. Hawa, over to you.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Omar, and thank you to everyone who's watching live on YouTube and to everyone for joining us today, alhamdulillah. So I know that we've got a really diverse audience, and I think what's been really beautiful about this session today is just seeing this completely multidisciplinary approach to this problem, because I think that's the only way we can truly tackle it. Yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this. So I do have some slides and I am going to whiz through them. As Umar said, I'm a lawyer with the CPS, and one thing I must say is I think barristers are just known for being really bad at keeping to time generally, but I really want everyone to have a chance to ask them questions, so I'll go through this quite quickly. Hopefully most people will be aware of who the CPS are. We're the largest prosecuting authority in England and Wales. So when you hear about criminal offences, stabbings, drugs, murders, sexual assaults, the police investigate it, they pass it over to the CPS, we decide what to charge, who to charge, and we take the cases through to court and support victims and witnesses through that process. We have a number of staff networks supporting a number of different minority groups. So we have the Disability Staff Network, we've got a number of faith ones, Sikh, Christian, we have the LGBTQ Staff Network, and I chair the CPS Muslim Network. So just because I thought it was quite relevant, considering this is such a community event, and as I mentioned, we're having this multidisciplinary approach, I wanted to mention that our staff networks, we all have almost like an internal remit and an external remit. Within our organisations, we support the organisation in ensuring that it's meeting its equality and diversity objectives under the Equality Act, address issues like if there are issues with, let's say, prayer facilities, or if people are experiencing bullying and harassment in the workplace, or you know, helping people break through prejudices that might be stopping them from progressing in their career, mentoring, all that kind of thing. In the community, one of the things particularly my network does a lot of is we do a lot of hate crime awareness workshops, go out and talk to different community groups about what hate crime actually is, how to tackle it, how to report it. We also support our teams in offices. CPS has 14 offices throughout the country regionally, and we go to different offices where perhaps maybe there's a large Muslim population, but actually not a large number of Muslim staff in those offices. So we've done a lot of work with our colleagues in the Northwest area around Manchester. We've done a lot of work in the West Mids. For example, in London, we support a women's centre in Barking and Dagenham. And, oh, sorry, I don't know why that's, my slides seem to have got a little bit funny, but in any event, so we also do a lot of work with schools, and we do a lot of career events as well, work with the Black Police Association, Association of Muslim Police. And in terms of the career events and the work we do with schools is we talk to them a lot about, oh, I don't know why my slides have gone a bit funny, but we talk to them quite a lot about how bullying essentially is almost like a pipeline to hate crime. So I was really interested to hear some of the stuff that I think it was Hamira who was talking about in the work that she does with schools, because we go into schools a lot to talk to the children about bullying, because as I mentioned, that's sort of leads to, it tends to be hate crime amongst children, the name calling, treating people differently because they look different, or they wear a hijab, or you know that they're Muslim or of a different racial background. We do a lot of that work. So in terms of what I wanted to achieve today in talking to you all, I'm going to try and make my slide big again and see if it okay, that looks a lot better. In terms of aims and objectives, I just want to be able to give enough information to support individuals from the community, whether you're Muslim, whether you're not Muslim, whatever your background is, to be able to be confident in how you can report hate crime, to have that confidence that if you report it, it will be dealt with. I'm really, really grateful to Colin, actually, who was talking about the importance of reporting, because obviously we know that there are certain sectors of society that do have low confidence in the criminal justice system. One of those is Black men, one of those is the Muslim community. Those are both of my communities as a Black Muslim. So it's something I'm very, very, very passionate about, increasing that public confidence, because we can't change things if we refuse to engage with the system. Also maybe address some issues and misconceptions about hate crime. I think sometimes when people haven't had a positive outcome, they think it's because either the CPS or the police don't really care, but actually it's more to do with the challenges in prosecuting hate crime in some instances. But as Colin mentioned, actually, in terms of the statistics, the amount of hate crime reporting is increasing. We are seeing a lot of high conviction rates. And I actually, in terms of the local area in London that I look after, I actually do look after sort of the cases that go to Croydon Magistrates Court, which Lambeth Borough falls under. So, and I'm also a South East London girl, and my husband is a South London boy. So I'm very, very passionate about a lot of the things that you guys are talking about. And that's why I really hope that I can do my bit on behalf of the CPS to really support you in becoming what we call active bystanders and upstanders. So whether you are a witness or a victim, to be able to actually deal with this, and also just to empower also the Muslim community in tackling this issue. So one thing that I tend to find is when I talk to people about their personal experience of racially or religiously aggravated hate crime, and I do want all of you who are watching to think about it, you know, have you ever been a victim of this, or have you ever witnessed such an incident? And I know it can be quite difficult to think about, but often people will tell me, I've never actually been the victim of a hate crime, or I've never seen anything, but, and then they'll tell me something really disturbing, like, you know, I was spat at on a bus and called a terrorist Paki bomber or something like that. But they'll say, oh, I've never been a victim of hate crime. Or they'll say, I didn't report it because there were no witnesses. You are a witness to a crime against yourself. Some people think that unless there's an independent eyewitness or something was caught on CCTV, that means there's no witnesses. You are a witness yourself to things that happened. And I think it's really important, and I'm going to go into this a bit more, but rather than to question yourself, what is the evidence available? Was it really a hate crime? It's always better to just report it and let the authorities sort of deal with those issues. Hate crimes are a cross-government priority, actually. So CPS is one government department, but across all of Her Majesty's government, it is a priority. And I don't need to go into it too much because the other speakers have spoken about this quite a lot, but it's that acknowledgement that hate crime is a bit different to other crimes, and the courts recognize that, because the trauma that it can have in terms of affecting someone's personal confidence, it can affect whether or not, for example, a woman feels comfortable enough to wear her hijab in public or on public transport. We all know, those of us who are part of the Muslim community know that whether or not a Muslim is the victim of an attack or the alleged attacker, there's always these sort of backlash hate crimes that are carried out against Muslims. So it's not an attack on an individual, it's an attack on a whole community. And I've also put there that people can suffer serious harm due to this prejudice and even murder because of their religion. And that is really talking about how, you know, I talked about how bullying is a feeder into hate crime. Well, hate crime at an extreme level is a feeder into genocide, right? That's how it all starts. So just really quickly, looking briefly at the definition of hate crime, and this is agreed by the CPS and the police. It's any incident which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on a person's race or perceived race. And then it also says the same for religion. And that line about perception is also important, even if the individual isn't a Muslim. So, for example, Sikh men tend to sometimes be victims of Islamophobic hate crime because out of ignorance, people think that their turban is a signifier that they're Muslim. So it's all about perception. I'm not going to go into the law too much, but they're two different bits of the law that look at hate crime. Some have specific offences and some essentially say any criminal act, if it's motivated by that hostility, and that hate, then it can be treated as a hate crime, and the court then has to give a more severe sentence. Breaking down the definition, really, Hostility isn't described in the legislation, it's just given its everyday meaning. Religious group is quite wide, so it includes obviously Muslims, but also people of no belief, like people are agnostic, so almost like sectarian attacks. And in terms of that demonstrating hostility, what you'll usually find with hate crime is that there's a criminal offence, whether it's criminal damage, assault, and there was something maybe said or done very shortly before or after the attack. And then in terms of looking at motivation, we can look at the perpetrator, for example. Do they have a history of posting Islamophobic comments online? Have they done this kind of thing before? Do they have a propensity to violence? At the CPS and the police, we flag cases to say that there was hate involved in the case, even if once we apply what we call the code for Crown prosecutors, which is we can only prosecute cases where there's enough evidence and it's in the public interest. Even if it fails that test on our systems, we still have flagged them to know that, okay, this victim might need enhanced support and that kind of thing. When we're deciding whether or not it's a hate crime, we'll look at the incident. Was it a prolonged attack, a sustained attack? Did it involve elements of degradation, humiliation? And then, as I mentioned, we look at the perpetrator. I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail, but I just wanted to show you all that essentially when you have certain criminal offences, on the right, far right, you'll see the basic penalty. But if it's the racially or religiously aggravated type of that same offence, you can see that there's a more harsh punishment. So for example, with common assault, in the magistrates court, if it was just common assault, it can only be dealt with in the lower court. So there's magistrates court deals with less serious offences, Crown Court deals with more serious offences. Maximum penalty would be 6 months, but actually if it's a hate crime, it can go to the Crown Court and receive up to 2 years penalty. So that was the only reason I included this, not to bore you with legal jargon. And then just really quickly, because I really do want to leave time for Q&A, is just to say that in terms of victim support, for those of you who are nervous about coming forward, there's so much we can do to support you. We have things called special measures, which means that if you're intimidated to the point that it would impact your evidence, we can apply to the court so you give evidence, for example, behind a screen so the defendant can't see you, or you give it on a live link so you don't have to attend court and you're from home. And there's always a witness care unit through the police and witness support at court who will take you through the process, support you throughout, inform you of what's going on. And the prosecutor on the day of the hearing will also be there to talk to you. And all members of the criminal justice system have signed up to what we call the Victims Code, which includes the fact that you can give your own impact statement and talk about how it's affected you. So the court bears that in mind in sentencing. In sentencing, the court has to say out loud what sentence they would have given if there was no religiously aggravated aspect of the offence, and then say this is the increased sentence we're imposing because of that. So they essentially cannot ignore it. And then very briefly here, what I'll say is do pop along to the CPS website. I've given the full links here, but you'll never remember them. So really it's just cps.gov.uk. But there's also, if you do feel as though actually I reported a crime and nothing happened with it, I wasn't satisfied, you can avail yourself of our victims' right to review and our complaint system, and we will do a completely independent review. Again, a different lawyer will look at it and see, and if we think we've made the wrong decision, we can in some instances restart that case. And then just really quickly, often people are bystanders to these kind of offences. Please, 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 if you witness it, report it as well, because then sometimes you save the victim from having to come to court and go through that trauma, because we can prosecute cases victimless. And then just a quick slide on how to report hate crime. As Colin mentioned, if someone's in immediate danger or it's a live incident, 999, but with the police, you can call 101 if it's not an emergency. Go to a police station, although I think during COVID, police probably would prefer if you did it online or on the phone. And then there are a number of different organisations that are almost like third-party reporting centres. You can talk to them and they will contact us as well. So I'm going to leave it there and let Umar go straight into the Q&A, but our network can be contacted on this email address, and you can also visit the CPS website. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hawa, for that breeze-through presentation. I know that it must have been difficult. We've literally had so many questions, that have come up. So what I'm going to do is, I know we want to finish on time. We've got about 10 minutes left. So we'll jump in with one of the quick questions for Colin, if that's okay. And one of the things shows that Lambeth has had an increase in hate crime for Islamophobia, and as of last month, I think there were 30 Islamophobic hate crimes, and these are just the reported ones. So, what more can the police do to tackle this, and how can they also support the increase in reporting?
Hi, Umar. Sorry, I was just finding the mute button. No, thank you for the question. I've posted quite a long answer in the chat bar, and I think so. So that 30 crimes is the last 12 months, and out of those, 6 have been solved as well, which is about 20%, about 1 in 5 of those crimes. And that really is too few. We know that many more crimes happen, and so reporting is the key, so we can better understand the picture of what's happening and better improve our service to people experiencing Islamophobia, which obviously is unacceptable and obviously something that we want to do something about. So reporting is the key. So either people can report online, so look on the website, the Met Police website, you can enter your postcode, and you can find out about your local police team. You can also report online. You can phone 101. Obviously, it's an emergency, dial 999. There's other forms of online support. So True Vision is a national online reporting service for hate crime, and also offers advice to organisations and people around what to do. And I've left the link in the chat. And sometimes there's just simply information that people want to pass to us anonymously. And so Crime Stoppers is a good way that if people don't want to phone the police, but do want to pass us information, not necessarily reporting, but certainly pass us information, they can also contact Crime Stoppers. So, and I think the last bit really is around, we've got our local safe neighbourhood teams, and we've got our safe transport teams that work really closely with Lambeth Council, we work really closely with Transport for London. If there's organisations and groups that want to reach out and get in touch and either host an event or simply talk about, make a link and talk and find out more about what the local police and the local officers can do, because that interaction will build that trust and encourage people to report, then please do. And I'd strongly encourage that. So so a lot of information there. I think most of it I'll put it in the chat bar, which can hopefully be shared.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Irfan, you want to come in there?
Yes, Suma, thank you for that. In Lambeth, one hate crime is more than 30 is a large number. We don't even accept any form of hate crime. We are a community that is really like diverse community. We have people from all different backgrounds, all walks of life, and hate crime is not accepted in Lambeth at all. We do not tolerate it. We work very closely as a council with the police, and we would urge, as Colin said, that report as much as you can. Unfortunately, the reporting is very low. That is the issue that we keep having, because once we get a lot of reports in a certain area, if it's happening in a certain area, we can allocate a lot of services there and look into why this is happening over here and how we can eradicate it. So I would urge again that reporting is a main thing that we need. We need to build up the confidence in the community that hate crime is reported. It doesn't matter if you see it, if you're a victim, or if you're a culprit of it. Please, please, please do report as much as you can, because reporting makes a massive difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Irfan. We've got another question that's come in. It says, my daughter is currently 6 years old and attending a primary school. I'm somewhat hesitant to expose her to things like the news because of the open Islamophobia I know she will face. How can we raise their aspirations and ambitions to become head teachers? Sister Humaira, Huda, and Hawa actually, all H, amazingly, we could probably hear from all three of you on how to raise aspirations of our children, particularly our girls. I'll let Sister Humaira start with the response.
Thank you, Brother Omar. I think it's a really important question. I think as a girl, she should have high aspirations to begin with. But as a child, every child has to have high aspirations, regardless of where they are. And I'm quite confident Lambeth schools are very inclusive. And if a parent has got any concerns about a child being bullied or anything that she's exhibiting that shows stress, they need to speak to the school. And I think you as a parent can play a really an important role in this aspect. Regardless of what the environment is around these children, we need to keep hope quite high up in their mind. We want to give them high aspirations by literally saying it to them, that they will achieve, they will be doing well, and make sure that if at any point if a child is worried about something, that you as the first important adult in their lives, as a mother or a father, put things in perspective for them, because sometimes children can go through traumatic experiences. But if you put things right for them, if you put things in a context for them, they can overcome those and they can still achieve. So I think you as a parent need to play a really important role, and make sure, please, if your child is subjected to any kind of bullying in school, that you address that with the school immediately. And yes, I think events like these are very powerful. I was so pleased to see so many women speakers here on the platform today. That just goes on to show our women can do things, firstly, and they are very aware and they're very active. And it's a good role model for our daughters and for our sons as well, so they can see their mothers, their aunties, their sisters doing well, and for the daughters themselves to see that yes, we can achieve. And that's the thing we do at Iqra Primary School as well. But I won't get into details, but it's about having high aspirations and sharing them with the children, and get children to believe in those aspirations.
Thank you, Sister Humaira. How are you? You want to come in?
Yeah, just in addition to everything that Sister Humaira said, like, I couldn't agree more. I was almost like clapping back here as she was talking. But I think also for me, I think representation really matters. For me, growing up, I did not see Black Muslim barristers, and now that I'm a barrister, it turns out there's lots of us, and not just Muslim barristers, but actually ones who are visibly Muslim. And I didn't see that growing up, and I think that sometimes we underestimate how important that is. So I think that definitely talk to your schools, talk to local organizations about coming into the schools. Like at CPS, our Bay network loves going into schools. Our Muslim network loves coming into schools. And we do a lot of work in a school actually in Whitechapel in East London, exactly for this reason, because they say that the girls don't see enough role models that look like them. And then it's also about literature and things like that as well. I really do go out of my way with my sort of nieces and nephews and the children around me to make sure that some of the books they see, do they see themselves being protagonists or in different roles and that kind of thing. And I think a really good example is even, Colin, so I keep referring to Colin, my police colleague, but obviously Colin was talking in his talk about working with the Association of Muslim Police. I think whether or not you are from that background, I think what I would say to other groups is, if you go to engage with, let's say, a school that has a diverse population, be sensitive and maybe talk about that. Say, at the police, we have people from different backgrounds. At the CPS, we have people from different backgrounds, and talk a bit about that, because even if you're not representative of the community you're talking to, I think it's important to let people know these are career avenues you can get into. So what I'd say is, as a parent, just continue talking to all of us. If you want any of us to do work with your school, your children, we're always happy to.
Thank you, Sister Hawa. So what I got from both you and Humaira is more around positive reinforcement, and I totally agree that we need that. Just going over to Irfan, and we'll get a response from our local MP Florence shortly. But it's more around, how do you engage with Muslim constituents more? that, you know, not only do they need a voice, but they need a voice that results in positive change. So what can we do, or well, what can you do actually as a council to engage with your Muslim constituents more?
As you know, you probably already know, I'm very approachable. I'm very easily approachable. I'm very active. I like to listen to issues. If anyone is being faced any issues, needs any ideas, any support, any form, shape or way, we as a council try to work with our community as much as we can. We believe that it takes a whole village to raise a child, and we work with everyone individually in whatever needs they have. We would listen, we're dedicated to listening and sorting out issues that they've been faced with. It could be Islamophobia, it could be in schools, it could be the way they're feeling around the area. We provide so many services, but we want the community to come to us. And, you know, because if we don't know that any issues are being faced, we cannot exactly eradicate it. But as soon as we know there is an issue, we do everything to eradicate it.
Thank you, Irfan. Just we'll finish off with one quick question, and I suppose that would probably bring this conference to an end, and I think it applies to all of our speakers. Can you give one recommendation relevant to your respective fields in how to tackle the issue of Islamophobia?
Shall I begin?
Absolutely, Irfan. Go for it.
Thank you. What I would say is that we need to work together as a community. If we want to tackle any form of hate crime, we have to work together. We have to support each other. We cannot be differentiating between each other. All religions need to work together to tackle this form of hate crime. Hate crime needs to be reported. If you see it, you hear about it, or you face it, you need to report it. Because the only way we can eradicate it is if it's reported. If as a council we hear about it, we know where it's going on, we can provide resources and services to that area to tackle any form of hate crime, which is one of the reasons, as you may have seen, that we passed the definition of Islamophobia, showing that as a borough, we do not accept any form of hate crime in any form, shape or way. So I'd like to end by saying, report it if you see it, hear it, or are a victim of it. The more you report, the more we can support you. And we're always, as a council, we are very approachable. Sometimes you may feel a backlash, whatever, but if any issues, I'm open. You can email me, contact me, and I will reassure you that I will raise it to the top level and see why it wasn't investigated, what happened, and where we went wrong. And we're human at the end of the day. Mistakes are made, and we will look to eradicate those mistakes to build the faith within you. Thank you.
Thank you, Irfan. Howard, can I come to you next? What kind of recommendation, or what one important recommendation would you give?
So I'm going to cheat and just do two, and one of them is definitely going to be reporting, because it said, you know, relevant to our area. As I mentioned, report it. I just find so often the community try and be the police and the CPS and even the judge. You know, I've heard people say, I didn't report it because the police are too busy trying to catch murderers, or I didn't report it because there were no witnesses, or whatever it was. Or I didn't think it was a hate crime. Just report it, leave it to us, and we'll deal with that. And then the other one I would actually say, which is a wider piece, is education as well. And I would say this is for Muslims and non-Muslims. We need to work together as allies. Because as I said, if you witness it and you report it, you can save a victim from having to go through a lot of trauma. So I think it's about education as well, letting people know what is a hate crime, and also letting them know a bit more about Islam, so that we have allies that are really invested in supporting the community. So yeah, reporting and education.
Thank you, Sister Hawa. Sister Humera, would you like to, I know you mentioned already during your talk that there were two key things that you wanted to really tackle. Perhaps a reiteration of that, or an additional recommendation. Irfan had one, Hawa has two, so maybe you can go for three.
I can give many, but I think the most important thing, and I'm speaking to parents out there, or if you have nieces or you've got nephews, or if you're dealing with any aged children, young adults, please give them the confidence that we are proud of them as Muslims. There's no dichotomy between a Muslim and having success. They can go both together. They don't need to compromise on their religion in order to be successful in life. They can achieve both. And it's down to us as adults to give that confidence to our children. How it happens in schools or not, I think it starts with us within our community. We need to ensure that we are protecting our children from harm and at the same time preparing them so that they can go out in this world, which is very difficult for them. And Islamophobia is very, very real, but prepare them emotionally so they can overcome all these challenges. So we have to play a really huge role in that, and a very, very positive role in this journey for them.
Thank you so much. What I'm going to do, I know that, as I mentioned, we do have a lot of questions that have come in. Unfortunately, for timing reasons, I do want to bring this to a close. My final my final words would be that this is going to culminate in a report, and I would urge the Muslim community to engage more. Let's start educating, as we said, reporting more, and become more active as a community. We need to work and support our counsellors, our barristers, our head teachers, our police officers, and across the board to all those Muslim organizations as well. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, for all those who have commented, for all those who have sent us questions, for the questions that have been received and weren't unfortunately answered. We'll have answers to them. We'll add them into the report, and we'll make sure that is published from the Lambeth Muslim community going forward as well. There have been lots of positive comments to all of our speakers around the presentation and the talks that they have given. So we really appreciate all of you for joining us today. And I'll end with Assalamu alaikum, and I hope you have a very good weekend. We hope to do this again in the future.